aristocracy do during the Victorian era? If you think they just had fun, you are very much mistaken. And right now, you will learn the truth. But behind this glamorous facade lay a complex and strictly regulated world, governed by unwritten laws and centuries-old traditions. It was a life of luxury, but also of strict obligations, where every step, from choosing a spouse to conducting a conversation, could determine your fate. Watch this video to the end, and you will learn why it was more important for an aristocrat to have an impeccable reputation than a huge fortune, and what secret code of conduct allowed them to remain at the top of the world. This is what happens behind the closed doors of London's most luxurious mansions. Every year, with the arrival of spring, the empire's high society flocked to the capital for the season. It was not just a series of entertainments, but a complex social mechanism, a veritable Vanity Fair and marriage market. The main characters on this stage were young debutantes, the daughters of aristocrats. Their main task, carefully prepared for since childhood, was to find a suitable match. Not only their future, but also the prestige of the entire family depended on their success during this season. The formal beginning was the presentation at court, where the girls were introduced to the queen. This ritual was a ticket to high society. Only after it did a debutante receive the right to attend the most prestigious balls and receptions. This was followed by a series of events scheduled by the hour. Morning visits, afternoon walks in Hyde Park, horse racing at Ascot, evenings at the Royal Opera. Each event was an opportunity to show off and evaluate potential suitors. The men in turn took their time choosing a bride, assessing her beauty, background, and of course, the size of her dowry. The ball was the culmination of social life. In huge halls lit by thousands of candles, destinies were decided to the sound of waltzes. Each girl had a ball book in which gentlemen signed up for a dance. An empty book meant failure. There was a complex language of gestures and hints. The way a lady held her fan or offered her hand could say more than any words. Etiquette was elevated to an art form, and the slightest violation could lead to social ostracism. Behind the scenes of this glittering stage, intense work was going on. Mothers and experienced companions wove webs of intrigue, made inquiries about candidates, and negotiated with other families. Marriage was first and foremost a strategic alliance, a union of land and capital. Even conversations were strictly regulated. Only neutral topics could be discussed. The weather, music, mutual acquaintances. Talking about money, politics, or personal feelings was considered the height of impropriety. The entire system was aimed at preserving the elite. It did not allow random people, even very wealthy industrialists, to easily enter this closed circle. Origin was more important than any amount of money. For aristocrats, the season was both work and entertainment, and the main purpose of their public life. It was a high-stakes game where the prize was the strengthening of status and power. I would be very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about this approach to marriage as a tool for maintaining one's position in society? Write about it in the comments. What if I told you that a true aristocrat was not just a rich man, but an absolute monarch in his own little kingdom? The country estate was not just a home, but the center of his power and source of wealth. Here he ruled, judged, and maintained the order inherited from his ancestors. A lord's day was not filled with idleness. The morning began with business meetings with the estate manager. They discussed the harvest, the collection of rent from farmers, the repair of buildings, and the condition of the forest lands. The lives of hundreds of people living on his land depended on the aristocrat's decisions. He acted as the supreme judge in disputes between tenants. His word was law, and he was responsible for the welfare of his subjects, following the principle of noblesse oblige, position obliges. The estate was a complex, self-sufficient organism. Its territory included not only farms, but also mills, sawmills, and smithies. Income was generated from the sale of grain, timber, and game, and with the advent of industrialization, from the extraction of minerals if coal or ore was found on the land. The huge mansion, the heart of the estate, also required constant supervision. The aristocrat's wife, the lady, managed this complex household. She was in charge of a large staff of servants. She held daily meetings with the housekeeper and butler, drew up the menu for the week, and planned receptions and visits. The comfort of the family and the reputation of the house depended on her organizational skills. It was a complex management job, hidden from prying eyes. The Lord also performed important public functions in his county. He could be the Queen's Lord Lieutenant, representing the central government at the local level. He patronized the local church, school, and hospital. Life on the estate was measured and subject to the changing seasons. In spring, they watched over the sowing. In summer, the haymaking. In autumn, the hunting season. And in winter, the time for balls and receptions for neighbors. This cycle remained unchanged for centuries. This system of land ownership provided the aristocracy with economic independence and political influence. By owning the land, they owned England. Their power was strong and seemed eternal. But what was life like inside these huge mansions, which ran like clockwork? In the next chapter, we will open the door to the world of the invisible army of servants, whose hands created aristocratic comfort. The secret for which aristocrats paid huge sums of money was perfect, uninterrupted comfort. Their homes functioned like complex mechanisms thanks to the labor of dozens of servants. These people were everywhere, but their main virtue was their ability to remain invisible and inaudible. Life in an aristocratic home was divided into two worlds, the upper world for the masters and the lower world for the servants. These worlds hardly ever intersected. There were separate staircases, corridors, and entrances so that the servants could do their work without being seen by their masters. The hierarchy in the world of servants was as strict as in the army. At the top were the butler and the housekeeper, the absolute rulers of the lower world. They hired and fired staff, monitored discipline, and were responsible for everything to the lady and lord. The butler commanded the male servants, footmen, and valets. He was responsible for the wine cellar, silverware, and impeccable table service. During dinner, he stood behind the Lord's chair, directing the entire process. The housekeeper managed the maids, laundresses, and cooks. She was in charge of the pantries, linen supplies, and maintaining perfect cleanliness in the mansion's countless rooms. She was the mistress of the house's confidant. Lower down the hierarchy were the senior footmen, the Lord's personal valet, and the lady's maid. These positions were very prestigious and required many years of experience. They knew all the habits and secrets of their masters. At the very bottom were the junior maids, kitchen workers, and footmen. Their work was the hardest and dirtiest. They rose before dawn and went to bed long after midnight, doing the grunt work. For the aristocrat, servants were part of the furnishings, an impersonal mechanism. It was not customary to address them by name, except for the most senior ones. They were living tools that ensured the smooth running of their masters' lives. A servant had to know his job perfectly and anticipate the wishes of his masters. The ringing of a bell meant that he had to appear immediately, silently and with an impassive face. Showing emotion or fatigue was unacceptable. This invisible labor created the atmosphere of ease and carefreeness in which the aristocracy lived. Every ironed collar, every polished spoon, and every candle lit in the fireplace was the result of someone's efforts. But these efforts remained behind the scenes of the ideal picture of aristocratic life. What if everything you were taught at school was only a small part of what a young aristocrat needed to know? Education for the heir to a title and fortune was not so much about accumulating knowledge as it was about shaping character and establishing the right connections. It was a long journey, beginning in the nursery and ending in the halls of Oxford or Cambridge. The young aristocrat spent the first years of his life in the nursery, under the supervision of a nanny and governess. His communication with his parents was strictly limited and formal. The main focus was on learning languages, primarily French and good manners. At around the age of 10, the boy was sent to one of the prestigious private schools such as Eton or Harrow. Living conditions there were Spartan, cold bedrooms, meager food, and strict discipline. It was believed that this would strengthen the character of the future leader. The curriculum was based on classical languages, Latin and ancient Greek. Studying ancient authors was supposed to instill in boys the ideals of honor, duty, and service to the state. Exact sciences and modern subjects were considered secondary. However, the main thing about private school was not the education itself. Here, boys from high society formed friendships that lasted a lifetime. Future prime ministers, generals, and bishops studied in the same classes, creating a strong network of elite connections. After school came university, Oxford or Cambridge. Here, too, the focus was more on social life. The main activities were participating in sports clubs, debating societies, and of course, parties. University gave young people a sense of belonging to the ruling class. They saw themselves as the future masters of the empire. Here they honed their social skills, conversation skills, and leadership skills. The final stage of education was often a grand tour of Europe. It was a long journey that was supposed to broaden the young man's horizons. He became acquainted with the art, politics, and culture of other countries. This whole system was aimed not at training specialists, but at raising gentlemen. The main qualities were not intelligence or erudition, but character, honor, and the ability to behave in society. This was the code that distinguished them from everyone else. As a result, aristocrats received an education that was completely detached from practical life. They could quote Homer in the original, but had no idea how a factory or bank worked. But that was not necessary. A trip around Europe, known as the Grand Tour, was a mandatory ritual for a young aristocrat. It was not just a tourist trip, but the final stage of his transformation into a socialite and future leader. Preparation for the tour began long before departure. The young man was accompanied on the trip by a mentor or bear leader. This was an educated person, often a graduate of the same university, whose task was to protect his charge from trouble and guide his education. The entourage also included servants, a cook, and a translator. The journey was long and expensive, lasting from several months to several years. The route began in France, where the young man honed his French language skills and learned fencing. Paris was the center of fashion and social entertainment. The journey then continued through the Alps to Italy, which was the heart of the Grand Tour. Here, the aristocrats studied the ruins of ancient Rome and admired the architecture of Palladio and the art of the Renaissance in Florence and Venice. Visiting ancient ruins was considered absolutely essential for an educated person. One of the main purposes of the tour was to acquire works of art. Young lords bought up ancient statues, paintings by Italian masters, and rare books. These collections then adorned their family estates, demonstrating the taste and wealth of the owner. In addition to the cultural program, the Grand Tour was a time of relative freedom. Far from the strict supervision of their families, young people often indulged in all sorts of excesses. Gambling, passionate romances, and duels were frequent companions on such trips. During the trip, the aristocrat received letters of recommendation to British ambassadors and local nobility. He visited European courts and met politicians and diplomats. This was his first entry into the world of European politics. The Grand Tour gave the future ruler invaluable experience. He saw the world outside England with his own eyes, learned to understand people, and acquired international connections. He returned home a more mature and confident person. This journey was an exclusive privilege of the upper class. It created a cultural divide between the aristocracy and the rest of the population. Cosmopolitanism and knowledge of Europe were another marker that distinguished the elite. Thus, the Grand Tour was not just a trip, but an investment in the future. Families spent a fortune so that their heir would return home a true gentleman, ready to take his place at the head of the estate, parliament, and empire. Are you ready for the shocking truth about what life was really like for an aristocratic woman? While a gentleman's education was aimed at shaping him into a leader, a lady's upbringing had a single goal: to make her the perfect wife for a man of her social circle. Her world was beautiful but extremely limited. Girls from aristocratic families did not attend school. Their education was provided at home by governesses. The main focus was not on science, but on so-called accomplishments. the fine arts. A young lady had to be able to sing, play the piano, paint with watercolors, and speak several languages. These skills were not intended for professional development. Their sole purpose was to entertain her future husband and guests in the drawing room. Reading was strictly regulated. Girls were only allowed to read moralistic novels, poetry, and religious literature. Books that could cause unnecessary thoughts were strictly forbidden. Great attention was paid to etiquette. Girls were taught how to walk, sit, make small talk, and manage a complex household. They had to become perfect hostesses and managers of large houses. The life of a young lady before marriage was under constant supervision. She could not appear in public without being accompanied by her mother or a chaperone. Any hint of flirtation or independence could ruin her reputation forever. After marriage, her responsibilities changed, but she did not gain any freedom. Now she was subordinate to her husband. Her main tasks were to bear an heir, manage the household, and organize the family's social life. What was it like to live in a world where your value was determined solely by a successful marriage? In the next chapter, we will learn how the husbands of these ladies controlled the fate of the world in closed gentlemen's clubs. The power of the aristocracy was formalized through their hereditary right to sit in the House of Lords. This made them not just wealthy landowners, but lawmakers whose right to rule the country was unquestioned. Politics was not a profession for them, but a natural extension of their status. Sessions at Westminster Palace were an important, but not the only part of their political life. The Lords saw their participation in debates as a duty to the crown and the nation. They discussed laws relating to trade, the army, and the administration of the colonies. Often, their decisions directly affected their personal financial interests. When discussing grain laws, they protected their income as landowners. When making decisions about India, they thought about their investments in colonial companies. However, real politics was conducted not in the chamber, but in informal settings. The heart of London's political life was the private gentlemen's clubs in the Pall Mall area. Membership in clubs such as the Whites, Brooks, or Carlton was a must for any influential aristocrat. In the luxurious interiors of these clubs, over lunch or a game of whist, ministries were formed and the fate of bills was decided. Here, intrigues were spun, alliances were forged, and rumors were spread. A conversation in the club's smoking room could be more important than official debates in Parliament. The clubs were strictly divided according to political affiliations. One was for Tory conservatives, the other for Whig liberals. They were the headquarters of the parties where their strategies were developed. Politics was part of an aristocrat's lifestyle. He could attend a meeting in the morning, go to the races in the afternoon, and give a speech at the club in the evening. It was not perceived as hard work, but rather as a game for the elite. They ruled a vast empire with the ease and confidence of people born to rule. Their classical education gave them a broad outlook, but often deprived them of an understanding of the technical and economic realities of the new industrial age. They sincerely believed in their mission to bring civilization and order to the whole world. The white man's burden was not just empty words for them, but a real justification for colonial expansion. They had no doubt about their right to rule other peoples. This system ensured stability and continuity of power, but it also made it incredibly closed and detached from the lives of most people. The empire was ruled by a small circle of relatives and friends who met in the same living rooms, clubs, and country houses. Leisure for the Victorian aristocrat was not just relaxation, but an important part of their lifestyle, a way of demonstrating status and physical fitness. Idleness was despised, so even free time had to be filled with active and worthy pursuits. Sport occupied a central place in this cult. Horse riding was not just a skill, but an art. Aristocrats learned to ride from childhood. Walks in Hyde Park were a daily ritual, and the ability to ride a horse was an integral part of a gentleman's image. The main event of the fall and winter season was hunting. It was a complex ritual that brought together all of the county's high society. Fox hunting, with its red coats, packs of hounds, and jumping over obstacles, was the highlight of the event. Shooting was no less popular. Aristocrats organized grand hunts for pheasants and partridges on their estates. The ability to shoot accurately was a source of pride and a reason for competition. With the development of technology, new sports emerged. Yachting became a pastime for the wealthiest. Owning a yacht and participating in regattas, such as those in Cowes, was the ultimate status symbol. Horse racing was not just a sport, but a national passion. Events such as the Epsom Derby or the Ascot races attracted the entire high society. It was an opportunity not only to see the best horses, but also to show oneself, place bets, and spend time in the company of equals. One of the most important events in the life of the aristocracy was the country house party, a multi-day reception of guests at a country estate. It was not just a friendly gathering, but a complex, carefully planned event. The goal was to entertain, establish connections, and resolve business issues in a relaxed atmosphere. Guests were invited for a period ranging from several days to several weeks. The host had to compile a list of invitees so that the company would be harmonious and interesting. It would have been extremely imprudent to bring together political opponents or social rivals under one roof. Life during such a reception was strictly scheduled. The day began with a communal breakfast, after which the men went hunting or shooting. During this time, the women strolled in the park, wrote letters, or did needlework in the living room. Everyone gathered again for lunch. After lunch, there was a quiet hour, followed by new entertainment, tennis, croquet, or group walks. The evening was the culmination of the day. Before dinner, everyone changed into evening attire. Dinner was long and lavish, with a variety of dishes and elaborate table settings. Conversation at the table was a true art, with everyone trying to shine with their wit. After dinner, the ladies retired to the drawing room, while the men remained in the dining room for men's talk. Over a glass of port and cigars, they discussed politics and finance. It was here that the fate of ministerial portfolios and large investments could be decided. Later, the men joined the ladies. The evening continued with music, card games, or amateur performances. Sometimes there were even small dances. The success of such a reception required a tremendous amount of work by the entire staff. Dozens of servants worked behind the scenes to ensure maximum comfort for the guests. The success of the entire event depended on the coordinated work of cooks, maids, and footmen. Country receptions were an important tool in social and political life. Romances began here that led to advantageous marriages. Here, government ministers could convince hesitant peers to support the necessary legislation in an informal setting. This tradition strengthened ties within the ruling class. They lived in the same circle, visiting each other's homes. This created a sense of unity and a shared world that was completely closed to outsiders. The world of the Victorian aristocracy was based on an unwritten but strictly observed code of honor. Being a gentleman meant not only having a title and wealth, but also following a certain set of rules of conduct. This code was their main distinguishing feature and source of moral superiority. The central concept was honor. A gentleman's reputation was his main asset. Any suspicion of deception, cowardice, or dishonest behavior could permanently close the doors of high society to him. A gentleman's word was equivalent to a legal document. Card debts, or debts of honor, had to be paid immediately, even if it meant selling part of one's estate. An unpaid debt of honor was an indelible disgrace. The attitude towards money was paradoxical. It was absolutely necessary to have it, but talking about it, or even more so, earning it in an unworthy way, was considered vulgar. The ideal was to live on income from land, without being directly involved in commerce. A gentleman had to show restraint in his emotions. Violent expressions of joy or grief were considered bad form. A true aristocrat always remained calm and impassive, no matter what happened. Physical courage was a mandatory quality. A gentleman had to be a good horseman, a skilled marksman, and ready to defend his honor at any moment. Although duels were already banned in the Victorian era, the ideal of readiness for combat remained. An important part of the code was a special attitude towards women of their circle. A gentleman had to be extremely polite and gallant. Defending women's honor was his sacred duty. This code applied only to people of his own circle. An aristocrat could behave completely differently towards members of the lower classes or other nations. Double standards were an integral part of this system. Appearance was of great importance. An impeccable suit, perfect cleanliness, and grooming were mandatory. Carelessness in dress was perceived as disrespect for society and a sign of moral decline. This unwritten set of rules was the framework on which the entire world of the aristocracy was based. It instilled in them a sense of dignity and confidence in their right to rule. Being a gentleman was not a privilege, but a duty, a heavy but honorable burden. We have immersed ourselves in the world of the Victorian aristocracy, a world of luxury, complex rituals, and unwritten laws. Their lives, as precise as an expensive chronometer, were devoted to preserving and increasing their power, status, and wealth. Country estates and London mansions were the stage on which the drama of ruling an entire empire was played out. We saw that behind the outward ease of life lay the strict obligations of a code of honor, the complex work of managing estates in intense political games. It was a world that seemed eternal and unshakable to its inhabitants, the pinnacle of human civilization. It is now a thing of the past, but its legacy can still be seen in the traditions, architecture, and very structure of modern society. What other aspects of life in the past would you like to explore with us? Suggest topics for future videos that you would be interested in seeing in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new journeys through time.